Good morning,
Hi,
Professor
good evening
Ashtekar.
for you.
I hope I'm catching you at a good time in Pennsylvania. How is the
It's
weather
terrible.
there
It's
today?
very, very cold, and it's been snowing last few days. I mean, last couple of weeks have been very different from.
Yeah, I heard about the storm
Yeah,
and a couple of places in US, certain
right.
states.
I
Yeah.
say.
Yes. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with
Yeah.
me today. Before we begin, I want to express what an honor this is for me. Your work has been so influential, and having the opportunity to document your life journey through these interviews feels truly significant. I consider myself fortunate to be able to capture your story, sir, starting from your early years all the way through your remarkable career today.
Since you sort of express your feelings, I also think that it is very nice that you're doing this for science education and outreach, and I think this is very important for young people. So I also want to thank you for doing this.
Today, I'd like to focus on your early life, your childhood, schooling years. I understand you're born in Kolhapur
No,
in
no, I was born in
1949.
Shirpur. I don't know why this all this wiki page and so on
Oh,
is wrong.
okay.
So I was born in Shirpur, which is it's a kind of it's a small town in Maharashtra, quite far from Kolhapur actually.
Maharashtra.
And my father was in
Hmm.
civil service, and at that time he happened to be in what in India we call revenue department, and so he
Yeah.
was stationed in that place, and that's where I was born.
So, sir, you're born around 2 years after India became independent, right? So, could you share with me your earliest memories about growing up there during that time? Also, give us some idea about your family.
Okay, so I don't have any memories of Shirpur. The reason is because, as I mentioned, my father was in this Maharashtra government civil service, and so following the British tradition, all these reasonably higher officers were transferred every few years, and so we moved a lot. I went to at least five
Hmm.
schools, five different places. So I don't have much memories from the place where I was born. But starting from the next place we went, I do have some memories. They were called the main towns. I think in some places they are called tahsils. In Marathi, it is called taluka.
Mhm.
So it is like the district is divided into few talukas or tahsils, and then each tahsil has many villages and such thing. So this was kind of in one of these tahsils, and so it was. Growing up in those days, I mean, cars were very rare. We actually did have a house, and there was a stable next to the house, and stable had horses and buffaloes,
Oh,
and got fresh buffalo milk and such thing. And apparently, I had some, and I don't really remember exactly what happened, but when I was very young, apparently I had some kind of a allergy towards the buffalo milk. So they got a goat for me. So
okay.
that goat milk was just for me. So these are kind of countryside memories, so to say. But I think by the time I was 3, I was already interested in some, very elementary mathematical things and so on. Since it was a very small town, my father had asked some teachers to come and give lessons to my older siblings. And so they would go. And
Mhm.
in those days, we had the little kids. I guess it will be shocking for people to hear this now, but the little kids had this abacus. They're like there's a little wooden frame, and there are
Yeah, with wires
beats
and
exactly,
beads on it. Yes,
lot of big beats, and that was how you
that's a
learn
big.
counting 1, 2, 3, and 10, and such
Yes.
thing. So I had my abacus. So apparently I used to go with my abacus on my shoulder and sit there, even though I
Ah,
didn't understand what they were saying. Just learning this kind of thing. So
oh, that was the early exposure to the
right, just
counting.
just counting kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then we
Mhm.
again moved in this place that I was just mentioning. We had this house, and the house had a little terrace. And one of the strange things that happened is that I actually fell from the terrace as a little kid all the way down
Okay.
into there was sand there. And I got some things that are very faint now. The sand particles got something, but here. So it was
Okay.
quite a traumatic experience. Yeah,
Definitely.
especially
Yeah,
at that.
yeah. Your parents would be possibly scared and rush you
Yeah,
to the
yeah, I'm sure
doctor.
they did all those things. I don't. I probably fainted. I was probably unconscious or something like that. So, just to tell you, the kind of little life that it is not that everybody was always supervised. There were servants around, but it's not that everybody, we were looked at the time.
Give us some idea about your parents. Like, what was their background in terms of profession, and what kind of exposure you got at home before you started your schooling?
So, as I mentioned, my father was in civil service in revenue department. His background was that he had a law degree. This was the British Raj, right? I
Okay.
mean, before independence. When I
Mm.
was born, he was already a Tahsildar or this Mamledar is what they call in
Oh.
Marathi. Throughout his life, he was known as very uncorruptible Puritan thing. I mean, to the extent that people felt, well, you shouldn't be so Puritan because it really hurts your career and such things. People would tell him. I mean, he had reasonable influence because in those days, in his next stage in his career, when he was the deputy collector, and deputy collector was in
Mm.
charge of several talukas, or several tehsils, so to say. And then he was also a magistrate, so there will be he would hear cases, and these cases were
Mm.
not criminal cases; they were typically, revenue kind of
Elections.
land and such kind
Mm.
of cases. So it was quite amazing. But when I was growing up, right? I mean, I was in school and so on, people would approach my friends' parents to try to influence my father, and my
Mm.
friends and their parents knew not to not to do this. So so he had a very strong
Uh,
reputation of being, and I think that is probably true, that being so principled, he could have advanced more if he had been more quote unquote practical in terms of dealing with his superiors, etc. His duties involved touring, because the idea was to go and check out everything in those area.
mhm.
And so he was not often at home. I mean, he was at home about half the time. Not half the time he was
Mm.
touring. My mother actually came from a economically slightly higher background. What happened is that when my father was in law school, he had a friend. By the way, my parents, I mean, they belong to the Jain community in Maharashtra. And
Mhm.
so he had a friend who was also in law college and was also a Jain. I mean, in those days, there were so few people going for higher education after the bachelor's and such.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they became friends. And so my father used to visit his friend. My mother was the sister of this friend. So basically, how they met.
Oh.
So in those days, it was quite unusual, to say the least, that they basically chose each other rather than having a regular arranged marriage, which was very, very unusual. And surprisingly, again, a very unusual thing was that my parents, they always called each other in the respectful tone. In Maharashtra, the usual
Mm.
thing was that the wife called husband, to me, that is to say, respectful, whereas the husband called wife tu,
Yes.
like in French,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
German, they also have these two things up here, or tu or tum or ap, So, but my father
Mm.
and mother, they always call each other in the respectful tone, right? Ap, I mean, in
Oh.
Hindi, it would be ap. I mean, they would always call each other up. So it was not a completely conventional family. It was not totally
Mm.
different either. And again, I grew up as in a Jain family, but they were not super religious. In other words, we did not really have prayers or
Mm.
pujas, etc., Jain pujas, something. We did go to the Jain temple in town once in a while or something. But then we also went to, Shirdi Sai Baba. So
Sai
they went
Baba.
to all kinds of things. It's not nothing very, very religious. So my mother grew up in a small village,
Mm.
but she did actually complete her matriculation, high school diploma. So she was the only woman in a big area. So they were not extraordinary by any means, but they were not average either. I mean, they had this
Mm.
intellectual
Mm.
values very deeply in them, and I think that's what they communicated. Maybe this happens with everybody, but as I grow older, I'm more and more grateful to my parents. I mean, I can't imagine how many things they did for me. When you are growing up, you take things for granted. Even when I was in 20s or something, I just took for granted things. Of course, they're my parents and also. But now, almost every night when I go to sleep, I really have their images, and I sort of am full of gratitude for everything that they did for me. It's just a very loving family. And the other thing is that when it came to career choices and so on, so all their children,
Mm.
they did not put any pressure. You should do this, you should do that. which was another totally
Oh,
unusual thing compared to the, you know, uh, science.
to the traditional families go for engineering, go for medicine, and
Yeah,
do
and then
this.
now
Yeah,
probably
that's
in
what.
IT and
Yeah,
business. But
yeah,
in those days, it
correct,
was
sir.
always engineering. Or in my days, it was always engineering or medicine, and that's it.
So, how did your interest in science first develop? Perhaps during your school years,
Curious,
or was it kind of an immediate attraction, or did it evolve over time? So, could you tell us about that?
right? So I, I mean, whatever for whatever is worth. I mean, I was good at school. My sister was also very good at school, and I was good, and so I was always first in the class and such things. So I did like mathematics in early days, right? In the elementary school, there is no science, almost no science. I mean, this was mathematics, and I liked that. By the time I was in the fourth standard, and that was in Pune, and it was a
Mm,
Deccan Education Society was a very well established place, and this it was called Bal Shikshan Mandir,
mhm,
which was in
mm,
Pune in Deccan
mm,
Gymkhana. I went to that school, uh, and then at the fourth standard in those days there was a at least in Maharashtra there was a statewide competition in which I think mathematics was a big part of it, but there's also Marathi
mm,
literature, local literature was and so on. And I did get that scholarship, which was considered to be uh, honor in those days. And it was a very pleasant experience. The teachers were very nice, and I did get interested more in mathematics than in the beginning, than in say languages, more or less in the from the beginning. But then, really, the big transition occurred roughly when I was in seventh standard, and that is when they
mhm,
start teaching specific science classes. Until then, there was general science, and then there was a physics
mm,
and chemistry and biology, two separate things, and there was a little bit more detail, and you start learning about Newton's laws and such things. And so that was more focused. So I realized at that time something which was quite unusual. I mean, it was a big thing for me, a sort of a
mhm,
surprise. I should backtrack a little bit. My family was always interested in literature and such thing, and so we used to get a lot of magazines, and in those days there were these local libraries everywhere, and so you subscribe. It was not very expensive, and you could get a book out for keep it for 2 or 3 days and return it and such things. And so I used to read a lot
oh,
Marathi. I did not know any English in those days, and so Marathi books and Marathi things.
mhm,
So I was quite interested in literature. But then around fifth standard, you start learning a little bit of English. But by seventh, I was started getting exposed to some kind of literature. And then it
mm,
suddenly occurred to me, realized that what I thought were great novels or a great piece of literature in Marathi, not I thought as a little student, but they were acclaimed, that
mm,
they really were kind of more or less derivative works in the sense that the main ideas came from the English literature, the older English literature,
oh,
or some famous works, and these were adapted to the Indian side, something like that. And I realized then
mm,
that what is considered as being valuable, or what is valued by the society, by the culture, etc., is a
mhm,
literature. And I realized that this was
yeah,
very localized, that it was very culture dependent. And then one of the unbelievable greatest ideas of all time that Newton had, right? That the
oh,
moon goes around the earth and the apple falls down, figuratively, uh, that they
mhm,
are subject to the same law. Only the initial
mm,
conditions are
mm,
different. The moon had
mm,
its initial trajectory, which was initial velocity, which was different from the apple came from, right? And to me, this is,
mm,
I mean, even now, right? I get goosebumps about that. That there can be such universality in the physical universe, and so that made a very deep impression on me. And somehow at that time, I felt that um, but physics in particular, universality of physics in particular, because these were very fundamental
mm,
laws compared to say chemistry or biology. I was very attracted towards that. So there was this realization, which came in a way of by understanding the relative nature, subject to culture and
mm,
background of other human activities
mm,
compared to fundamental science. That kind of fundamental science is universal. That the fact that that English didn't matter. Newton's laws were used exactly the same way in China as in Japan, as in Australia, as here in India,
Yeah.
and so I think that is very important. Even within Europe,
Yeah.
there are great literary figures which the neighboring countries have not heard of because they have not translated. And whereas here, this universality has made a huge difference, and that is what attracted to me science, and particularly towards fundamental physics.
I mean, did you have teachers or any other influences other than books also, which kind of influenced you to pursue science? That's talking about Rajaram College. Based on my understanding, you also got into IIT, but you chose pure science. Like, how did family and other react to that decision? Because in today's time, they generally prefer going to engineering or medicine, and it's not
Or
normal to
IT,
choose.
right? Computer science.
What advice would you give to students today who are showing an early interest in research when they are in school at the moment, right?